Welcome to All Bodies on Bikes, the podcast, where all bodies are good bodies, all bikes are good bikes, and all rides should be celebrated.
All Bodies on Bikes is a movement to create and foster a size-inclusive bike community. So join your hosts, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marley.
As we explore the complexities of the biking world, help us break down barriers and create the world that we want to see. And don't forget that all bodies really means all bodies, not just larger bodies, but bodies of all sizes, ages, races, abilities, genders, sexualities, and beyond.
Come along for the ride. Hello, All Bodies on Bikes listeners, and welcome back to another episode of All Bodies on Bikes. As you may have noticed, it is just Marley here today. Maggie has been holding down the fort quite a bit, and so I figured it was time for me to pull my own weight. No, that's not actually what happened at all. Maggie is just has some other things going on, and so I will be handling today's conversation, and I'm really, really excited about it. Today's guest, who I'll introduce in just a second, we go back a couple of years, and we'll chat about that a little bit, some of our personal memories together, but really excited for this conversation. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce her because I could speak platitudes all day long, but it's more interesting when you get to hear exactly why I love this person so much. So without further ado, our guest today is Alyssa Gonzalez from Treehouse Cyclery. Alyssa Gonzalez, who uses she, her pronouns, is a community organizer, advocate, and new bike shop owner based in Boulder, Colorado. She works with groups, organizations, and individuals to create more access, education, and opportunity for queer, bipoc, and FTWN-B communities in the outdoors. We'll talk in a minute about what all those acronyms mean. Alyssa is passionate about highlighting Black and Brown joy while sharing diverse perspectives and experiences within the cycling community in the hopes of creating a more inclusive and welcoming space for cyclists in Colorado and beyond. Welcome to the show, Alyssa.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
It's really funny. When we booked you, I was thinking about when we first met, and I think it was Rome in Knoxville last year, maybe? Or was it before then?
I think it was briefly before then. I think Rome and Knoxville, we spent the most time together, but we met at the Girls Gone Gravel Festival.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Very quickly. Yes.
Yeah.
You invited me to a disco party. And
yes.
then that was it.
I remember that. Yeah. I remember seeing you riding down the road and you had all your bike packing gear. And I was like, I want to be friends with that person. And I knew who you were because of Instagram. And I think you knew who I was. But last summer, we got to spend a lot of time together. You know, we stayed together in Knoxville and then in Vermont. Still the hardest race I've ever done. So, well, let's jump right into it. So before we get into talking about Treehouse, which is kind of the main point of what we're talking about today, in your bio, you talk about queer, BIPOC, and FTWN-B communities in the outdoors. And I hate it when people use acronyms that I don't know. And so I try to be better about that on my own show. So can you tell us what does BIPOC mean and what is FTWN-B?
Yeah, definitely. So BIPOC is kind of a term that discusses Black and Indigenous and people of color. So typically it's shortened as just like POC, but I like to just use the full BIPOC just to recognize that Black and Indigenous folks have different experiences traditionally from just people of color. And FTWN-B stands for Femme, Trans, Women, Non-Binary Community. So that's anyone who essentially is not a cis man. And so it's kind of just also encompassing another marginalized set of people operating in the world.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining those. And super important to provide space for all those. And that's a lot of the work we're both doing in this space. But let's talk Treehouse. So first, the name. Where did the name come from?
I wish there was a more exciting story, but when me and my co-owner Colby were on a road trip coming up with the idea of we were just kind of playing around of like, oh, what would happen if we had a bike shop? He has he said that he has always wanted to own a shop called Treehouse Cyclery, and it was that simple. And for me, that kind of felt perfect right away. And as we thought about it more, we want to try to embody everything that like a treehouse embodies. I never had a treehouse growing up, so I always had these like really cool imaginary ideas of like, oh, like me and my friends would sneak out and hang out in the treehouse, or when I get older, I'll go in there and I don't know, drink and smoke weed and hang out with my friends still. So it's kind of just this fun place for people to hang out. Everyone's welcome. You have a good time in it. And it feels just like a little community. So,
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I noticed on
yeah,
your website and your Instagram, you explicitly say a number of times that you're a community-focused bike shop.
yeah.
What does that mean?
So for us, like we want to try to do things a little bit differently than it's been going on, at least in the bike world and with how shops have been running. Uh, Trying to focus a little bit more about on the community, our local community, and also just the cycling community as a whole, listening to their needs, their pain points, um, everything from like what type of group rides and events they want to what type of brands they're actually interested in and supporting, or what type of things that they're looking to learn and know. And we believe that just building a stronger community where people are communicating and connected together will just create a better kind of outdoor community as a whole. And having a bike shop being the focus and the focal point of that is pretty important. So we're just trying to listen to our community as much as possible and try to give back to them and build a place where everyone feels like they belong.
So cool. And I know you guys just had opening weekend over Labor Day. I saw it all over my Instagram, which I think is a good indicator that the word is getting out. But how did that go? What was that like?
It was really cool. At first, it felt a little unceremonious because on Friday last week when we opened, we just like unlocked the door and we were like, okay, now what? Like people just come in, or what are we doing? And but then it got really exciting as we just had people trickling throughout the day. We had our first purchase. We had the first person who came into our shop was a non-binary rider, which I was super stoked about, to just have like a kind of queer start to it all.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we had group rides all weekend and had a fun little pop-up with the local coffee shop and Cuban pastry maker. And so it felt like a really cool event and space just to see bikes out on the corner of the street where our shop is, and to see so many people in the space just like super excited, talking, meeting new people. It was the perfect way to kind of ring in the whole opening.
It's so fun. Definitely a little jealous that I wasn't there. I spent a lot of the month of August in Colorado, and I just did not time this appropriately. But
That's okay.
congratulations. That's really, really exciting. This is not one of the questions I asked you, but are you in Boulder or in Denver? Or where is the shop?
So the shop is located in Denver, in the Five Points neighborhood, which is a historic Black neighborhood. It's in the former space of, at the time, it was the only Black-owned bike shop, Chocolate Spokes. And so we moved in there a week or so ago. And then I live in Boulder. So it's about a 35-minute drive. So I'll eventually end up moving to Denver because the commute is already getting to me. But yeah, the shop is located in Denver.
Understandable. Very cool. I've done that commute a couple times, and yeah, the traffic through there is just stupid.
Yes.
Like, dang, yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little bit more kind of, I want to dig in a little bit deeper. So your website for Treehouse reads, quote, "We believe that bikes are a tool for good. Through bike parts and accessory sales, service, and events, we hope to build a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive sport for our community and beyond." So let's break that down a little bit.
Mhm.
I guess starting out, and I could name these on and on, but I want to hear it from you. Like, what are the inequities and the challenges that you're working to solve with your shop?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're just talking about like diversity, equity, inclusion, like there's a true list of things that we could just ramble on about that really shows up in a lot of spaces. Um, Talking about just the kind of front range of Colorado community, a lot of the stuff that we specifically heard from people, I sent out a survey to, had like over 200 people respond, a lot of people from Colorado. And some of the biggest things were people not feeling like they can call themselves a cyclist, people having issues or kind of like lack of access to gear and education, as well as not feeling like they were kind of in quotes good enough to show up to group rides. And so kind of those three main focuses were a lot of what people were talking about. And that's stuff that we're trying to address through building more inclusive community. So we're working with the Radical Adventure Riders Front Range chapter on building a bike packing gear library that will eventually have bags, outdoor gear, bikes for people to use to kind of help bridge that gap of not being able to find the right gear or really know what type of gear you need before you get outside. And then on like the group ride front, trying to just create more space and I don't know, kind of just like acknowledgement that like there are a lot of really talented and strong athletes out in Colorado, and not everyone can keep up with a 19 miles an hour gravel pace going up a mountain. And that's really hard. And it's kind of scary for a lot of folks to try to show up for group rides. And at the same time, they're still looking for community. So trying to create a little bit more of that space for group rides that are focused more on connection, joy, just social aspects versus the training aspects. And hopefully by doing all of that, just trying to make biking seem a little less scary for people.
Yeah. Oh man, you are speaking my love language right there. I'll have to make sure that, are you connected with our All Bodies on Bikes Denver chapter yet?
I am. Noelle is
Awesome.
a great friend of mine. They actually won our adventure bike raffle and is going to get a custom steel frame and fork and custom builds from us, which is super exciting.
Whoa, that is incredible.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
Man, Alyssa, that is, I wish you could take that model and just come drop it in the middle of Bentonville. Because that is like my dream bike shop right there, where you feel comfortable walking in and maybe asking a question that
Mhm.
you don't know the correct terminology, and or not even knowing what questions to ask. So kudos for making that space. It's, I know it's not easy. Are you working with specific brands in the shop, or are you what does that look like?
We have, I mean, some of the brands that a lot of people see in bike shops, in terms of like parts, accessories, and all of that, just because like there's only so much you could do with lights and GPSs. But
Yeah.
as much as we can, I'm trying to aim for 75%. We would like 75% of our inventory to be with independent dealers, whether that be local to Colorado, local to the US, or around the world, and trying to prioritize marginalized identities within those dealers. So women owned brands, Black and Brown and POC owned brands. So at the moment, it's kind of just a mix of a lot of different things. We are working with a lot of really great women owned brands. Rachel from Kama Surface makes these really awesome kind of yoga mat seat pads, Martina with Swift Industries. And then we're working with a lot of other local to North America brands. Currently, we're working with Bossy Bikes out of Montreal, and some cool bag brands like Farther from Tennessee.
Oh, very cool. I'll have to get those links and make sure we include them in the show notes, because we're all
Yeah.
about supporting those independent brands as well.
Yeah.
Well, super cool. Before we move on to some of the kind of other topics I want to pick your brain about, is there anything else you want to add about Treehouse Cyclery?
Um, yeah, I mean, we're a full service bike shop. Like our main focus is community building and events and rides, but we have sales and service for all types of people. Like we want to make it known that yes, we do have like a niche kind of focus with what we're doing, but any type of cyclist or person on or off a bike is welcome there, and any type of bike is welcome too. That's something that we're trying to make a priority, is especially in a community with a large houseless population. We want to be able to service all types of bikes as much as we can, and at least make sure that people are getting out there safely. So whether it's just like commuting around town, or it's their main source of travel and kind of transportation, or it's like their adventure rig. Like we just want to be able to support people in that, and hopefully also helping them with the education side of being able to service and work on their own bikes too.
So cool. Very, very cool. Well,
Yeah.
I wish you all the success in the world on that, but we're not done yet. Um, so I mean, I think it's very much related, because you don't go open a community centered bike shop without having a passion for
Yeah.
inclusion. So I knew you previously from the work that you were doing and continue to do, for, advocating for diversity, equity, inclusion, in cycling and beyond. Where does that passion come from? Why is it important to you?
A lot of the passion, I think, just comes from living my own experiences as someone with multiple marginalized identities, and kind of how tough that's been for me, even with someone with so much privilege. And like, I am a queer woman of color, I'm mixed race. I think the state of Colorado, 3.4% of people identify as multiracial. And so I grew up in Connecticut, where I'm sure the numbers are even smaller. And my experience kind of getting into the outdoors was later in life, I think, than most folks. I didn't see mountains for the first time till I was 24. And so a lot of that was, at least a lot of my advocacy work was kind of inspired just by trying to create spaces for myself. And then seeing how needed and important it was for other people in the community. And so when I started talking about my experiences and my perspectives and asking questions about, like, hey, why does this feel bad when someone says this certain thing, or how can I show up better for other people in my community, it kind of just lit this spark in me, where before that I didn't really have anything that I found that I was super interested in or passionate about. I ran track in college. I'm a designer, so I studied art. I love art, but nothing really felt like, I don't know, that kind of like, oh, this is something that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And as I started becoming more passionate about advocacy and social justice work, it just clicked for me. And it's just been going since then.
Do you have any favorite projects or like success stories of things that you've worked on that you've really seen the impact of?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, two of the first big projects that I've worked on that have continued to be like really important and special to me, separately, but kind of in the same, they're both uh, scholarship opportunities for women of color. One of them is for women of color to get their ski instructor certification through a group called Women of Winter. And then the other one is a scholarship through Rome Fest. And that one has continued to grow each year. And it's for women of color to be able to attend the Rome Festivals, which is a women focused mountain bike festival. And so that's felt really special, just as someone who is newer to skiing and newer to biking, in struggling to get into those spaces myself, being able to have the privilege of bringing other folks in. And like last year, I think we had over 35 people on our scholarship at Rome Fest across the country coming to the festival, which was really, really exciting. And just be able to create that space for people is really held like a lasting impression on me. And the same with Women of Winter. I still volunteer with them, and we're going into our third season of scholarships. And I was a scholarship recipient my first year, and that was just extremely impactful for me, that I feel really lucky to be able to give that back to other folks.
That's so cool. It's interesting. With All Bodies on Bikes, we do a lot of intentional community building and bringing people together. And this summer at Rome in Knoxville, I got to hang out with Brooke Gowdy brought a group of Black women out, and then all the scholarship folks. And there is just something special that happens when you are among people who have similar experiences as you,
Definitely.
and
Yeah.
being part of a marginalized community. And it's hard to explain if you haven't experienced it, but it's like a feeling of safety, I guess. Then you can truly just like, instead of having to just be a cyclist. And I would love your input on this if this is different for you, but I get to be a fat cyclist, or I get to, just bring in all the elements of my identity and not have to like hide one.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. And that was my first experience ever with the group Women of Winter. When I got my ski instructor certification, it was me and five other women of color on the slopes. I had only been skiing for 2 years, so I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm here, but it was the first time in my life that I had been exclusively just with like women of color for any extended period of time. And that felt kind of like silly to me. I was like, how did that even happen? That I've just spent myself in, or I've spent most of my life in such white centered spaces. But for the first time, I finally could just like talk, act like myself, say things, share experiences, and not have to explain myself, which is a really taxing thing that I think I work through and deal with a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think just being in spaces with people, like affinity spaces specifically, but people with similar experiences, and identities. Yeah, you don't have to wear the mask that you do in other places or code switch, and it you just show up really authentically. And I've definitely felt that space always with Burkowdy, because I mean, you can't not be authentic around her. And then just like in a lot of the BIPOC focused and queer focused groups that I've been a part of, it feels really cool to be in community with people like you.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And it's funny, like the more I spend time in those intentional communities, the less patience I have for non-inclusive communities.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
it's like my bullshit tolerance is just zero, you know?
Oh, definitely.
I don't know if you have any advice for that because I know, I mean, it's a fact of life when you work in the bike industries. Sometimes you're in spaces that you might be the only one who looks like you and you're speaking on behalf of all these people. How do you deal with those instances?
Yeah, I would typically say in like my normal life when I'm not having like the advocacy hat on, I'm like a pretty spicy person. But honestly, teaching or like working with other groups and people and being in spaces talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and advocacy a lot, it's taught me to have a lot of patience and understanding and just slowing down.
Mm,
And that's something that we're like trying to bring to the shop as well. It's just like that kind of removing like the assumptions. And so for me, I often have a pretty protective barrier up where if I'm in spaces where I don't feel safe, it's really easy for me to be like on the defense of like, oh, this person's trying to be racist or hurt my feelings or whatever. And so I've just tried to slow down and be like, hey, maybe they are well intentioned, or maybe let me just take a second and use this as a learning experience. And I know that that's not the answer for everyone, because that's a lot of weight to put on them, but that's just kind of how I have found makes me feel the best moving through
yeah.
it, is just trying to treat everything like a learning experience. And the goal of the work that I do is not to brainwash everyone into believing the same thing as me. It's just trying to get people to think a little bit differently. And it's a slow but important job. So
That's such good points. And thank you for your patience and your compassion, I guess.
yeah.
Because yeah, I think you are right. I think a lot of folks are not necessarily malintentioned or coming at it from a place of I don't know, ill will. It's just
Mm-hmm.
ignorance. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily make it any easier or make it any better to then spend your time, explaining things to people. But let's go back to some of the positive things. So, you've been in this industry a while and doing the advocacy work for a couple years now. Can you think of some like successes or some of the biggest changes you've seen over the past couple years?
Yeah. I mean, just having a community of advocates and like leaders across the country that I can call on and chat with, like you and Brooke, and I mean Sheila out of DC. Like there's just so many people that when I first started biking and getting to the outdoors, that list was a lot shorter. And so it's been really, really cool and super inspiring over the last few years that I've been doing this work to just see how excited people are for change and how many people are not taking the excuse of like, oh, this is just how it's always been done, and just doing things differently. And especially in my local community, like here in Colorado, I mean, in the last 6 months alone, I think the amount of groups that have popped up focusing on queer communities. I mean, All Bodies on Bikes Denver. There's a group Femmes in them. Like, there's so many groups that are popping up for people. Where I was just joking with the RAR team the other day, is like, what a privilege it is that we have on a Saturday to be like, oh, which inclusive group ride do we want to go to? Like, we have to choose between three or four of them now, when it really wasn't like that. So that's been really, really cool to see.
That's so cool. And I am uh definitely a little bit jealous because that movement has not quite made it to Bentonville yet. Uh and I think people's reaction would be like, well, you should start at Marley. And
Mm-hmm.
I would love to. My time is limited and
Yeah.
running all bodies on bikes turns out takes a lot of time. But I would love to help mentor some folks if folks are kind of feeling that. And because it does take some skill and you make some mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But also just like I think you said it really well, the learning and the listening to what your community needs, not necessarily what does Marley want to do today.
Yeah.
So kind of on the flip side of that coin, what are, if we can get specific, what are some of the challenges you still see or things that you've run across in your time doing this work?
I think something that's been popping up, at least especially since I opened the shop, but just like in the last year or so, since I've been participating in a lot more like gravel races and events and talking to like larger brands and people, is there's this really big, I don't even know if it's a push for elitism, but like this idea that everyone has to aspire to be a professional athlete or Olympian styled athlete, where like all of the gear that's coming out and the bikes that are being pushed out in the industry and the components that people are being asked to buy is all for the 1% of athletes that are like racing in the tour or in the world championships and stuff. And I mean, it's not necessary for people to like have to have these super expensive components or carbon race bikes to be able to like show up and be a cyclist.
Yeah.
And also it doesn't like, it's on the elitist and kind of like intense athleticism side, like you don't also have to continuously improve and always be better. And like when you first like start biking, you don't have to in 2 years be like, oh, now I can bike like way harder than I used to. It's like everyone's growth and progression is different in the sport, and the way that people like to show up on a bike is very different. But it's been really frustrating to still see that that's kind of like the one thing that stayed over the last few years is like there has been a lot of push for more diversity, and there's been a lot of positives coming from brands that are trying to be more values driven, but at the same note they're still really like doubling down on you need the lightest, most expensive, fastest stuff to be able to succeed in this sport. And like that's something that I feel like is such a huge barrier for so many people trying to get into it, where I mean, like I wouldn't be able to afford any of the bikes that I have if I was not sponsored by the brands that I am. And like that's a crazy thing for me to think about, because I wouldn't be here today without like these large brands. And also on the same note, it's really hard for people to still get into the sport and spend even $500 on a bike, when now the cheapest thing on a market for a mountain bike you could get is like $3,000 for a full suspension bike, which is just really inaccessible to a lot of folks. So I'm hoping that can start to change soon.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. And I'm guilty of it too. Similar to you. None of the bikes I own I would be able to afford, with the exception of one. The Cannondale Topstone. I specifically asked for an entry level bike,
Yeah.
so that I could genuinely recommend it to people. And it's over $1,000, so it's not a cheap bike by any means. But it's a lot more affordable than some of the other bikes in my garage right now. But yeah, you're right. I think the industry is still focused on the lightest, the fastest, the fanciest,
Mm-hmm.
when realistically, like 95% of cyclists, could get by on a used 90s mountain bike.
Oh, 100%. And
Yeah.
like I just got a used 90s mountain bike that I'm building up because I want to know something different. Like when I started cycling, and I know this is a massive privilege, but like I've only ever really ridden carbon full suspension mountain bikes and a carbon gravel race bike. And I just got my first steel gravel bike that I built up last year, and it's been life changing. And yeah, like I want to understand, especially as a shop owner, how to recommend things that aren't just like super light and carbon, because it's not the most accessible type of bike for the adventuring that I like to do all the time too. And yeah, there's a lot of resources out there that aren't really being advertised and pushed, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. And back to the carbon thing, like I just got my first carbon bike, and yeah, it's light and snappy and fun. But also like I'm scared crapless every day that I'm gonna break it. Because
Oh
those
yeah,
things have
totally.
very real limitations and weight limits.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess since we're on it, as a shop owner, if there's a whole host of challenges that come with living in a bigger body and being into cycling. Um, oh my gosh, how do I want to say this? Sometimes you feel like you're too big, or I'm afraid to ask, like, hey, do you know the weight limit of that saddle? As a shop owner, how are you helping to address that? Is that something you are kind of, what does that look like for you?
Um, Similar to kind of how I said before, a lot of what we're trying to focus on, especially when working with marginalized communities, people in bigger bodies, people with disabilities, is like we want to move slowly with it and not make assumptions. Like I don't want to be like, oh, every single person can be on the same exact bike with the same exact saddle and all of that, because this just doesn't, that's not right, and it doesn't make sense. And so trying to um move slowly with that. And so like right now we only have really a few bike frames and accessories and like zines and stuff in the shop. And we wanted to be conscious of that because bringing in something like apparel, like for me, it is really important to, if we are trying to be something that is accessible for all folks, is I want to have a full size range of apparel that people can walk into the shop and be able to try stuff on instead of only having like a small, medium, large. And so like until we can get to the space where we could actually one afford and two like kind of fit that into our space in a like way that makes sense for us, I'd rather just give recommendations based on some of the articles and resources that I know you have, like the bike frames and apparel brands for people in bigger bodies. Like those are great resources for people to have, and they could still find that stuff. And if I could help be an avenue for those kind of resources, and that feels good for me right now. But yeah, I mean, we're trying to figure out the best way to bring in products that aren't just geared towards the mainstream view of what a cyclist is. And
Yeah.
I think working with the ABOP chapter in Denver is going to be really exciting too. And Noelle's been in a bunch, and I know that they're going to be super helpful. Just even going through this process with them of like building this custom bike, and I'm super excited that we get to do it with them. And yeah, I mean, there's just so many resources out there that we only know what we know, and there's so much that we don't. So I'd rather lend or yeah, just talk to our community about it and figure out the best way that we can start implementing that for them instead of trying to just be like, oh, we're only going to serve these types of things, or we'll only have these sizes because that's what we think most people can fit. Yeah, and hopefully trying to address some of the concerns that like all people and all body types and sizes like 100% can be on a bike. We just have to
Yeah.
find the right bike for them. No.
Oh my gosh. I wish you could see the smile on my face because I just want to like give you a hug. It I know the struggle you're going through right now. It's not easy to find brands that even carry a size range that you want.
Yeah.
So if I can help in any way with that, of sourcing or just talking to them and figuring out what works best, I would love to be part of that. And just for my own reassurance, but also for our audience, if I walk in and I tell you, hey, Alyssa, I weigh 250 pounds, as a shop owner, you don't necessarily care about that, right? Like to you, it's just a data point to make sure that I get
Hmm.
onto a bike that's going to work for me, right? Just confirm that in my
Yeah.
head, please.
Oh, no, 100%. Like one of the first things that I've been asking people, and Colby, my co-owner, when they're coming in and they're like, hey, I want to get a bike. Like the first thing we're saying is not like, oh, I don't know, like just go get this carbon thing that just came out or whatever type of bike that we're trying to push. It's like, well, what's your goal with it? Like, what do you want to do? And then talking to them about like their personal styles and all the other things that fall in after that. So the size really isn't a question. And the weight is just important for us to be able to get them on something as safely as possible because uh, frames can break and there are weight limits, and
Yeah.
they're not like every single bike can fit certain people with certain sizes, and even like different people with disabilities or just like custom things that we'll have to do. Like not every bike is made for everyone. And that's like our main goal, is trying to get people on the best bikes for them. And whether that's a new bike that they want to build up, or an old mountain bike that they have, or just like a beach cruiser that they just want to whip around town, like whatever that is, we just want people to be safe and comfy and have a good time.
Okay. Well, I love you, and I think that you are 100% on the right track. And I wish we could just preach this to every other shop owner in the world. Thank you for doing the good work. Before we wrap up, we have two last questions that we ask every guest. But is there anything else that we didn't touch on or that you want to talk about?
No, I feel like we touched on a lot of different things. No, we're an open book at the shop. We're always here to answer questions and admit things when we don't know what we're doing. And we just hope that, yeah, if anyone's listening in the Denver or Colorado community or visiting, just come by and say hi.
And how do they find you? Where can they look you up?
Yeah, so you can find the shop at Treehouse Cyclery. That our website's treehousecyclery.com, on Instagram, Treehouse Cyclery, and then me personally on Instagram is ___ Alyssa Gonzalez, spelled ALYSSAGONZALEZ.
Awesome. And we will have links to all of those in the show notes. But as we start to wrap up, so this first question is, what is your perfect day, either on a bike or outside? What does that look like for you?
Ooh, that's a great question. Since July 1st, when we moved into the space for the shop, I have spent a very small amount of time on my bike. So honestly, like even outside. So at this point, like my perfect day just sounds like sitting on my porch with my cats, uh, probably just reading a book and drinking some tea and maybe going for a walk. Very, very low expectations at this point and pretty simple things to make me happy.
Yeah, that sounds nice though. And I hope you get a chance to do that. I know building out a business can be difficult, especially when it's such a labor of love.
Yeah.
And then kind of switching gears for our very last question, and feel free to take this any direction you want. Besides bikes and DEI work, what do you wish people asked you more about?
I think it would be really cool to just talk about, like, I mean, I love talking about bikes and DEI work and advocacy, but there's so much more to me that I often forget about as well. And because I don't really get to talk about it with a lot of people. So just, I don't know, getting to know me outside of the sports that I do and my passion for advocacy would be helpful and important for me. Also, as a reminder that, like, not every single thing that I have to do is on a bike, or not every conversation I have has to be about DEI, because I really love like cooking and cats and I don't know, art and lots of other things that it's easy to get wrapped up in my career and forget that there's a whole other part of me.
Yeah. I'm going to dig in a little bit more because that was kind of a
Yeah.
non-answer. So specifically, what do you wish you got to tell people about more? You know, is it cooking? Is it your amazing cats? Like tell us more about it. Use this opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about my cats like nonstop. I think it takes maybe 30 seconds in a conversation with anyone for me to just like admit without anyone asking that I'm a crazy cat lady. But yeah, I cook a lot. I love cooking. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I have a pretty extensive cookbook library. And so I don't know, maybe ask me like what's the most fun thing I've cooked recently, or
Ooh,
what's something that I really would like to cook. So
awesome. Thanks
yeah.
for digging into that with me. I was like, this is not an answer, Alyssa. I'm gonna pull that out if I have to. Well, hey, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. We will have links to your website, to your own Instagram, and a couple of the brands that we talked about. And thank you for doing the good work and creating the spaces that we want to see in the world.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I'm looking forward to meeting more of the ABOB community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you.
This is an All Bodies on Bikes podcast powered by Feisty Media. The show is produced by Maggie and Marley and edited by the team at Feisty Media. Thanks for listening.